I want to welcome you guys to Sales Hackers webinar, How to Win the Revenue Relay and Crossing the Finish Line. We've got some truly rock star leaders within the industry to talk to you guys about what it takes to win that relay race almost every time. Before we kick it off, I just want to lob it over to, I'll start with you, Taft. I'll pick on you first to start our introductions. And then we'll go with Jen and Ivan to round it off.
Oh, hi, everybody. First of all, thanks for joining us. It's awesome to see so many folks here. My name's Taft Love. I am the CEO of Iceberg RevOps. So we're an agency that helps small startups, usually seed, Series A, bridge the gap from founder selling until they're ready to have a qualified in-house operations team. But before Iceberg, I was a police officer for 10 years, a federal investigator, and then switched careers, found myself in tech and did a while as an SDR, then an AE, and then found my way into sales and then ops leadership and held VP ops roles for some fast growing companies before founding Iceberg. And then when I'm not doing, Jen, I'm stealing your idea of giving more than just our resume here. When I'm not working on Iceberg and thinking about operations, have a 2-year-old son, and I'm a pilot, so I fly, do lots of volunteer flying all around Texas to get sick people where they need to go. All right, so that's me. Let's go over to Jen.
Oof, that's hard to follow up. I don't do enough good for the world. But that's inspirational, and maybe I will. It's funny that I thought if I wasn't in operations, I would become an investigator. So we should talk Taft. That's like, if I wasn't doing what I was doing, I feel like I'd be a really great detective. And it's like, I know it's a dumb thing, but like, I'm so good at finding out why a lead did an MQL. Like, I can go into your system and I will figure it out. And I'll figure out what's going on. And I'm like, I love finding a bug. So that's what I would do if I wasn't doing what I was doing today, which is a good transition to say I'm the CEO of Go Nimbly. We're a revenue operations consultancy. We are actually working a little bit later than Taft. So we will work after you already have a sales team all the way through IPO, primarily with SaaS companies, big ones being companies like Zendesk. We worked with companies like Coursera, Lattice, all that good stuff, a lot of unicorns. Pretty proud of our book of business. Started off my career as an Eloqua consultant. So really deep in the tech, went into Salesforce and then realized that there was nothing I could do in one system that wasn't breaking the other one, and got really obsessed with sales and marketing alignment and why these two teams that should be hyper aligned aren't. And that slowly became Go Nimbly. Original tagline was unifying our business stack, and then RevOps came to be, and we realized that's what we were doing. Other than operationalizing businesses, I make card games, do improv. Right now I'm dialing in from Madrid. I grew up in Madrid, so I'm here getting my Spanish back and being with my family for a month. It is brutal to work nights, but I'm trying to imagine that I work at a bar and like during the day I go hang out, and like at 5 p.m. I start my work day. So far so good. Ivan, I'll popcorn it to you.
Thank you. It's like the reverse siesta, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Well, although I did have a dream to be a police officer when I was a kid, I think like most kids growing up or most boys growing up, but I took a different route. I actually took kind of like not a straight path to sales. I guess I have a culinary degree, so that's what I made a living out of before I decided that I was not using my full potential of the noggin, and decided to go back to school. So I worked with 2-star chefs and some of the most prestigious restaurants in Scandinavia. And then there was a stark comparison going from a 2-star restaurant to the dining commons at San Jose State here in Bay Area, where I served 3,500 people a day instead of like 18 or 25 people in a night. So that's kind of like how I ended up here from Sweden. But I've been in sales and marketing for about 12 years now, always been in the digital realm of marketing. And we're selling a marketing automation platform prior to coming to Openprise. And one of the things I always felt was really frustrating when I was working with the people that were looking for a change in their platform was that the underlying problem was always the data. It wasn't necessarily the automation platform and the technology that they were using, it was actually activating the data that they had in their core systems. And through a conversation with a mentor, I ended up connecting with the CEO of Openprise. And I still remember to this day the whiteboarding session that him and I had for about 4 hours, just talking about how data flows within an enterprise system and why it's broken today. And so at Openprise, we go to market with what we call a revenue operation platform. Essentially, what we do is we help operational teams activate their sales and marketing data inside of their core system and automating their business processes that they either used a point solution to solve for, or have hacked a Marketo or a Salesforce to do things that they weren't intended to do. And we help to elevate those kinds of revenue operation teams into actually having a seat at the operational table and actually be the ones that are driving the business forward and being the ones that enable the digital teams or the sales team to actually hit their MBOs.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thanks, guys. And I'm coming from the content team here at Sales Hacker. I've been in marketing for 28 years. When I mentioned that, Taft said, "Oh, you started when you were 6." Yes, it's true. I started very young, but it's amazing. I've been in roles at industrial gas and chemicals, in retail, in automotive, so like durable goods. And in every situation, I've found that there has been a bit of conflict between sales and marketing. Now, in my most recent 5 years, I've noticed that being a bit more pronounced. And it's always like marketing saying, "Hey, sales, you're not following up with this lead fast enough," or sales saying like, "Hey, these leads aren't quality enough." So I want to address the elephant in the room and ask you guys, why? Why does this conflict exist? To Jen's point, right? We should be hyper aligned. What's the issue here? What do you guys attribute this to?
I'm happy to jump in. What we're talking about a lot of times when we've got teams misaligned, there's a few reasons why teams become misaligned. I think number one, just know it's okay. Like as humans, we're so much better at aligning vertically than we are horizontally. Like we just are. We're very good at aligning to our bosses. We're very good at aligning to our department. And we don't need to do a ton of work to get that team aligned, right? People are not talking about how do we get our entire sales team aligned? We are, right? Or how do we get our content teams aligned with our demand gen teams? They are. Like there's something about vertically, we're able to do that as humans, human nature. So then it's basically across the board that we have a difficult time doing that. I think one of the easiest places to look at why silos get created, which is what we're talking about. If you have a 2-person team, it doesn't happen as easily as if you have a 50-person team. So it's like a high growth number of employees that start. It's a lot of different departments and departmental units. The big one is a lot of metrics that aren't really aligned. So a lot of KPIs that are specific to each business, a lot of specialization. That's when we're going to start to see this misalignment happen and way more intense than anywhere else. And I think that at the get-go, the easiest reason why we're misaligned is because marketing's got an MQL number and sales has a revenue number. And I can create a lot of MQLs, but if I don't care about why they convert, then we're a little bit like on different mindsets and different zones. And so I think that's one of the biggest shifts. It's interesting that you're seeing teams having more issues because I actually see more marketing teams being accountable to revenue and having more, a need to at least explain how much revenue you sourced and what marketing campaigns are working, et cetera. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go. And a lot of that is because humans have a really difficult time aligning, from departments, and you have to be pretty intentional about it.
Yeah, I love the human aspect that you take to the approach in your answer there. And I also think there's another thing, like I'm a huge proponent of like accountability through visibility. Right.
Sure.
A lot of times it's also like difficult for teams to really understand what the true impact of something is. Right. And a lot of times, like, there is that pressure to meet your MQL goals. Right. And so maybe like, there is not maybe that clear understanding of like what was marketing impact on things. Right. And also looking at marketing's impact across the entire funnel, not just at the very, very top of it, and actually being able to attribute things back into even upsell conversations, right?
100%.
Actually having marketing driving those things too. And I think like the more visibility that we can have as an organization, the less fighting we will do, right? Because we will know what slice of the pie that we actually own, and therefore we also know which one that we can actually have accountability and responsibility for, instead of constantly, throwing things over the fence and going like, what's those guys over there, right? And really the reason why we're doing that is because we're just trying to protect ourselves, because we don't necessarily have visibility into the piece that we own.
I agree with both of those, and I'll add a little bit here from my experience. First of all, this might not be a super popular sentiment, but I'll explain it. Is I don't think removing friction from sales and marketing is necessarily a good idea. I think there is healthy friction, because
Sure.
some level of friction creates a feedback loop. If sales is never rejecting leads, if sales isn't giving feedback to the marketing team has no idea what it needs to do differently to drive better revenue. So I think a handoff is important. I think while you can share high level goals, it's okay to have sub goals that are specific to teams and drive feedback. But to Jen's point, you have to all be rowing in the same direction. There has to be a North Star metric that everyone is driving toward. And with smaller companies, at least, and I'd love to hear if this is something Jen sees going into much bigger businesses than we work with, but in the, 50 to 250 size startups, what we see all the time is really two things. One, and these are so simple, but I think they're important to say out loud. One is they have different incentives. What's good for marketing isn't necessarily good for sales. What's good for sales isn't necessarily good for marketing. And a situation that often gets created there is whoever is lower in the funnel has the power. If you're below marketing in the funnel and you have the power to reject what marketing sends, suddenly you have a level of power over marketing that marketing doesn't have over you. And that power imbalance can cause not just friction, but contempt. And that's where you don't want to get. And that's what we often step into is we're actually playing therapist as much as operations sometimes. And then the other thing is just misalignment on key terms. And I think this is something I've heard Jen talk about before, and I totally agree. Like, do we mean the same thing when we say lead? I had the very first Iceberg website, one of the panels when you were scrolling down was go ask your VP of sales how many leads you got last month. Now go ask your VP of marketing. Was the answer the same? If not, we can help. And that's such a simple problem, but that's a perfect example of how that misalignment creates a situation where you're not even speaking the same language. And so anyway, that's my 2 cents in smaller companies. Is those are really the two high level reasons I see all the time for friction that's not healthy.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you, like that friction, because that friction is what essentially feed that internal competition, right? It's like any healthy sports organization will have internal friction, right? But I also think that we're in a really interesting moment in time right now, because I think with the introduction of the CRO, we're now at the executive layer starting to change this perspective. And I think the idea of revenue operations is sort of like an effect on the backwaters of the introduction of that CRO. Like to your point, Jen, and what you reinforced, Taft, is like that single sort of collective goal. It is revenue. At the end of the day, it's revenue. If you call it a lead or it doesn't matter, right? Did it actually generate revenue for my business? And I think that, again, that highest level of a CRO really is what started to change that conversation 5 to 10 years ago with the introduction of that kind of more holistic, I guess, view of the business.
Ivan, you're mentioning a CRO. So that's something that I imagine like a larger enterprise type company might put in place. I've had the opportunity to work for a startup where, like you guys are right. When you're a smaller company, everybody's focused on, well, we're trying to get to Series C. So we're all focused on getting that next, round of funding. We're all focused on, keeping our jobs basically, right? Because we're a startup. Do you see significant breaks in like funnel leakage and in silos and like that communication breaking down with certain size of the business? Is there like a breaking point, a tipping point? It's like, oh, now you need a CRO. Now you need to be more focused on like the efficiency of that. Or is it across all size companies?
Well, so I don't think that I think that what's interestingly enough is that what we see because we sell into, 250 plus employees to like some of the largest organizations in the world. And it's interesting because like the problem is still the same. It just constitutes and scales differently, right? It's just like the visibility problem is still the problem. But like if I'm a startup in the Bay Area and I just got Series B, I'm innovating in flight, right? I'm fixing a attribution problem in flight. If I am, a large financial institute and I have 100,000 employees, I have attribution in place, but I still don't have the visibility that I need. It's just because like the attribution model and the way that I went to market when that was implemented 10 years ago is not how the world and the market looks like today. And so it's still the innovation problem and the visibility problem constitutes in the same way. They're just at two different various kinds of scale.
Okay. Yeah.
If you'll humor me with like a little story about, how to fix systems. So if you think about systems thinking or like a government story, it's like, how do you fix poverty? How do you fix environmental issues? You fix it by no longer growing. You can fix those issues if you can stop growing, you can calm the system down, and you can fix things. And that's not the space we live in, right? So actually it's high growth that tells me you need it. The faster you're growing, the more issues you're going to have, the more times that your business changes. If I could just stop the company and be like, oh, great, you have 50 reps and we're going to sell this much. And this is the sort, great, awesome. I can fix that. I can clean it up and no big deal. It's the fact that it's ever changing and growing so quickly that it's very difficult to manage that kind of system. And that's when I would introduce revenue operations. It's really about how quickly you're growing, because you can give me a 50-person company today, but if you're going to be 150 by the end of the year, or if you give me a 50-person company today that will be 60, like I've got two very different pieces of advice for you.
Yeah. I mean, Taft, correct me if I'm wrong here. I would almost say like, that's something that needs to be instituted day one, because like once you're at 50, you've probably already got like some habits in place, right? Like,
yeah. And so something, and I think this is especially important for people who are earlier in their careers and listening to this to keep in mind. And all the things you hear us say, I want you to remember that nothing we say should be applied as gospel in your world. The things that you hear us say should be used to build a framework for how you think about your business. So there are pieces of things that we're very confident in that you should look at your business and say, no, doesn't work for me. And so I think these are good conversations to have. But one thing to keep in mind is like when you need a CRO, I think what Jen just said is a really good way to think framework. Like, are you growing to a certain amount? So it's not a binary. Like if you're here, you do need one. If you're there, you don't. There are companies that have 1,000 employees and aren't growing. There are companies that have 30 employees that aren't growing and probably don't need to switch everything to a RevOps model and centralize your operations. And so, what these guys are talking about, and some things you're going to hear me say, I hope people will internalize, if nothing else, the idea that like use all this information to build a framework and apply it, versus saying once you hit 50 people, you got to have a CRO. Now, that said, if you're in SaaS and you're growing fast, chances are centralizing all revenue, including operations, and taking operations away from their client teams and centralizing them and having them roll up to somebody who is thinking big picture probably does make sense, because most 50+ person SaaS companies, especially if they're VC backed, they're under immense pressure to grow and change and innovate. And I really like Ivan's term, like innovate in flight. If they're doing that, then yeah, having a team that is stripping out those silos is probably smart.
that's really great. I want to go back real quick to, you sparked something during this conversation, the beginning of this conversation, where we were talking about like MQLs and marketing and sales having kind of slightly, maybe, I won't say misalignment, but slightly different goals. So like on behalf of my marketing brothers and sisters, like marketing might have the goal to say like, hey, we need to get 10 more contacts on this account because we know that it's proven like more contacts equal like a higher close rate, theoretically. But then those contacts might not be like director and above, where sales is looking at. Like, how do we bring that together? Is it just like, does it need to just be more transparent in the organization? Or how do we communicate, how do we make this alignment tie better?
Well, what
I'm
you're
asking
kind
on
of talking
behalf of
about is
myself
like,
too.
yeah. I mean, if I can flip it and like make it not operational and just like talk about the business problem, which is I'm talking about my top of funnel, like what's going on from the moment that somebody comes in and starts showing any sort of intent all the way through me booking a first meeting. Like, how
Yeah.
do I maximize that? How do I convert into more meetings? And that can fall in an array of places. It might be my MQL definition. It might be that I don't have a smooth lead assignment and it takes me hours before I pick up the phone and call someone. It might be my sequences are 3 touches and I give up too quickly. I don't know, right? Like it could fall on that. What a really great operator is going to do, they're going to look at that. They're going to first look at the metrics. We use 3VC, so volume, value, velocity, or conversion. Those are the 4 things that matter. I'm going to look at those 4 things. I'm going to find out if there's a drop in anywhere. I'm going to compare it month over month. I'm also going to compare it to benchmarks. And that's going to give me like very numbers driven, where's the problem? On top of that, if I'm a great operator, I'm also immersing myself in pretending to be the customer. So I'm going to secret shop my team. I'm going to go into the chat bot and put something in and see how quickly someone gets back to me. I'm going to listen to some calls and see what's going on. Like I'm going to make sure that I understand what the customer's feeling because I might be able to find some friction there that isn't showing up in my numbers. Between those 2 things, I've identified gaps and then I can get to work. I think the problem that we do a lot is we say, oh my gosh, we should implement outreach or sales loft. That will fix this problem. And it's like, well, what problem? More meetings. Great. Are you sure it's the sequencing? Because maybe your team's badass at that. And I think we have, and this is kind of Ivan's point, we have this like tech forward approach sometimes about fixing problems. And I don't want to be a dead horse because we say this all the time. But I think if I look at a revenue operations team and I say, are they super mature? Are they doing really incredible work? It's because they're identifying gaps and fixing them. They're not just prioritizing work. And that to me is something that like, we're talking about, how to pass the baton, right? How to make sure that that's going. And the reason we say that is because the places, if you just want to, at a glance, identify the worst places that are likely hurting revenue, it's going to be anywhere where you could call it a handoff. It could be a people handoff. It could be marketing to SDRs like we're talking about. It could be an SDR to AE. It could be AE to CS. It's like any of those people ones. It could also be systems. It's like, what's the loss between Marketo and Salesforce? Do we have lead leakage issues? Like what's going on with data product going into Salesforce? Do we have like an issue going on there? Is it access that people don't have? And we can just go look at anything that connects to things. That's probably a place you're going to find a lot of lift.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Jen, because we talk about this with our customers and our potential customers too. And we always talk about it in the people, process, and technology. Like
Sure.
where can we have an impact, and what is really your problem today? And I love what you're talking. I have a psychology research background, and so I have it drilled into my head to look at what's my working hypothesis, right? And all I'm trying to go out and disprove my null hypothesis, then I know I have something to work with, right? And one of the things that I would encourage everybody to, and I love what you were saying, this Taft too, also like they'll have a methodology as you actually evaluate your business issue. Like what is that methodology? I mean, I love organizations that actually purchase using a sales methodology, like people that make a purchase decision using Medic, for example, right? Those are the best organizations to work with because we cut through the BS so quickly, right? We get to like, I'm trying to have X business impact. Can you help me? Yes, we've helped other people with this business impact. Okay, now let's talk about the path to that impact, right? And it's not always a straight and narrow, right? And it's going to have to involve people, process, and technology, right? But I really resonate with what you said, Jen, earlier. Like, a lot of times, like we look at the technology and we go, like, oh my God, like AI was going to save the world, right? Where is AI in great digital marketing today? Where is AI, effectively being used in a sales environment that could replace a human being? It doesn't exist, right? And so it's like I feel like a lot of times, like as modern people, we rely on that technology pillar maybe a little bit too much, and we should look at the people and the process a little bit more as we start to evaluate what our core business issues are.
I want to chime in here and take this from a different angle because I can't add anything to what you two said. Like I love the 3VC approach. What a smart way to think about the world of operations. Like have a sort of categories in which problems fall and sort of approach everything methodically. I think that's awesome. And I want to go back to Marcelo, what you said. You specifically called out, like, there's a situation where, marketing has to add X number of contacts to every company, and we've decided that is the path to success. When I hear things like that, where I think the end of that story often is marketing is adding 10 contacts to every company, but sales is saying, I don't know, they're the wrong contacts. We're not getting in touch with them. We're not getting the success we expected from this marketing initiative that was to add 10 contacts. And what I often see is things like that, where you have systems full of data that are like the graveyard of great ideas that fill up a CRM and other systems. And anytime I hear that, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, they're missing a shared North Star metric. Because if marketing's part in this is to do 10 contacts, that's so much different than marketing being fully bought in and aligned to a revenue goal that drives their desire to do these 10 contacts, other than having like a metric they're trying to hit, which is 10 contacts. You can game any metric that's put in front of you if it's not aligned to the North Star goal for the org. And so anytime I hear things like that, and I finished your story for you and don't know if that's what you were thinking, but that's what my brain finished it, which is like, we did what we were supposed to do, so why isn't it working? And the answer almost always is that like top level misalignment, that RevOps is one path to solving in many cases, eliminating those silos more clearly than companies have in the past.
And what I'm thinking, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jen.
I was just going to add a story there, because I think people hear that about people gaming metrics, and you can kind of go like, yeah, and like brush it off. But it legitimately happens. Like, we had a story very recently of a marketing team that needed to hit an MQL number. So they put a bunch of money in Facebook ads, and they work, right? Facebook ads can convert to leads. Like, you can convert at that point, but they were terrible quality. And it like brought them eons back from aligning with the sales team, because it's like, now I'm required to, outbound to these people that like at a glance, I know where they're not ready. That was a very like low level of intent to like submit for something really dumb. And, the marketing team was under pressure. They know that creates MQLs. That's what they were accountable for, and boom. And, I tell that story because even in my own experience, I'll hear people talk about, people game the system. And then you see it and you're like, oh, shoot. And there's like example after example, reps like putting in dumb activities, right? Like all of that can be gamed, and we're good. Humans are very good at playing games. Like, we're very good at like understanding the rules and figuring out how to get around them. So if you're not tight there about like metrics that matter, you're going to get your business like doing things that you ultimately are paying for, and they're not actually equating any value.
And sometimes with the best of intentions, I think there are times when the marketing team isn't intentionally gaming the system. There's no malintent there in a lot of these cases, that I think, you see bigger, more expensive versions of this, Jen, but it's what we see too. And yeah, I think often all the teams are really doing their best, but if your goal is MQLs and Facebook turns less money into more MQLs, then like, you're doing what you're asked. And so then the question becomes, well, should we be holding the marketing team responsible, or is there some higher level of leadership who's actually failing the business, even if they're the ones who are mad and arm waving about marketing, gaming the system? And so that's where I often look, is like, let's look up a couple levels and see where these incentives are coming from.
And what I'm taking away from this conversation so far is like, especially for companies that are experiencing hyper growth, it's crucial, mission critical, to be aligned on those top level goals, and so that it incentivizes the right actions. Like, if I were to look at that, is that what I should be like really focusing on? And I mean,
yes.
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 And I'm looking at it. I understand, like, okay, we don't need to be tech forward, but are there tools that you guys look at to like stay in the know, to like know about things like, prospect signaling and intent and things like that? Like, what, I know it's not always about tech. That's not always going to be the answer. It's about business transformation first, and then tech kind of supports it. So what tools do you guys use?
Well, we obviously use our own platform. Like, so we use the revenue, our own revenue operations platform. In conjunction to that, we basically just have core systems outside of that, Marketo and Salesforce, and then we have some of those like adjacent software, mostly on the, I only had the sales view of it, but it'll be SalesLoft for our SDR team, and then we use Gong too for that feedback loop. I can't remember if it was Jen or Taft that talked about it, but like that feedback loop, like Gong is really important for that. We see, keywords in our conversations, right? And so we use that. That actually goes back into marketing. We actually feed that back into marketing. We say like, hey, this is what people are saying to us, at the very initial conversations, or in a demo or further line. Like, we actually feed that back into marketing. And the same things on the SDR side, where we use SalesLoft. And anything that's any recording that's above, I think it's 45 seconds. So any connection that we have with a prospect over 45 seconds, I review all of those calls. And then we try to feed back that information that we were given in that call back to the sales team, either for, hey, what are we hearing, right? Or into a marketing in terms of like, hey, how is a particular campaign maybe potentially resonating or being received by the audience?
That's great. It sounds like that's like the ideal situation, or like a very seamless situation. Jen and Taft, do you guys have like similar, like what does that seamless workflow look like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, I'll spew it out. I think I found like about 90% of the tech stack overlaps for our customers. So there's definitely a tech stack for SaaS companies that's coming to the top. I'd say at the core of it, what Ivan was talking about, there's some sort of like CRM and some marketing automation platform. CRM, Salesforce is the one. Marketing automation, HubSpot, Marketo, some Eloqua, High Enterprise. Oh gosh, I feel like we are tool agnostic. Pardot's not my favorite. That one still comes up. And for me, HubSpot's one to watch. They're consolidating like when you talk about tech consolidation, it goes from one way to the other. Like, we first consolidate, and then to make more money, we deconsolidate, and then to make more money, we redo it. So it'll come and go as humans. But right now, HubSpot's like bringing everything together. And my customers are a little too large for HubSpot, but it is pretty beautiful. Then I would say some kind of lead assignment tool. Lean Data, Chili Piper is coming in hot after Lean Data. So that's really interesting. They're starting to take on some lead routing. So that's kind of curious. There's some meeting booking tool that might be Chili Piper, Calendly, something like that. A data pending tool, a ZoomInfo Clearbit, a sequencing tool, an outreach of SalesLoft. So, LinkedIn Navigator in there, Intercom, or some kind of chat. So there's the tech stack that's happening. CPQ is going down market. So we're seeing a lot more CPQ coming to smaller and smaller companies. I have opinions about that, but I'm seeing it. Salesforce is an incredible selling machine, so they know how to manage the market. You've got BI platforms on top of that, because Salesforce is tough to report on. So again, Tableau is going down market too. I'm seeing like a lot smaller and smaller companies needing some kind of BI platform. And then a million things in between. You talked about intent data. I'm actually a little out of touch right now. I mean, Bombora was the one, but then it started getting packaged in a bunch of other tools. So I don't know if Taft or Ivan, what the gauge is on that, but Bombora was like the one to watch. And then, G2 also gives you that data, and Crunchbase gives you that data, but I don't know much more than that.
6 Sense. Yeah, there's a few out there.
6 Sense, yes.
Yep. And so we talked about, oh, go ahead, Taft. I'm sorry.
No, I was just quickly going to say, I think Jen listed like almost all the tools we work with also. And I feel like I'm playing the heel here this whole time, but, or being the boring one, but I hate nothing more than the, like, what's the tech stack you should be building? Because I think people take these too literally. We have clients and these smaller companies, especially, where somebody looks and they says, oh, well, if so-and-so uses this tech stack, it works. It's great. They're successful. I'm going to go buy these things. And just like a public service announcement here is start with the business and work backward to the tech stack. You're going to find in some cases, there are things that Jen and Ivan and I haven't even heard of that are perfect for your specific use case. So do your homework on tech stack. Don't get into the game that is like, how do I recreate a tech stack to recreate someone's success? Those are two different things. Divorce those concepts from one another. And I'm going to throw out one more like mildly vanilla controversial thing. Outreach and Sales Loft, I've started pushing people toward the ones that I think are the future of that market, which is Mixmax and Groove, because they use Salesforce as their database. So you're doing away with consolidating two separate databases and having to connect them and keep them in sync, which is impossible to do because they don't have as sophisticated plugins as a HubSpot or a Marketo do. And so you get the benefit of them sitting on top, like a layer on top of Salesforce. So if you're in Salesforce, you never have to wonder, is this the Taft at icebergops.com that I think it is in Outreach and Salesforce? You never have to ask that question because what's in Salesforce is what's in Groove or Mixmax. And so that's my 2 cents on like where that market might be going.
Yeah, and we see that more and more too. Like people, like the notion of like, hey, if it's not in the CRM, it didn't happen, right? I feel like organization walked away a little bit from that because it is so hard to manage the data in the CRM. And we obviously love somebody like you, Taft, going out and telling your audience that like, hey, like make sure your CRM data is up to par, because that's really what our core business is, like actually managing the data from a enterprise business driven perspective inside of our platform, right? So we manage the data in Salesforce. But I want to go back to something that Jen threw out there, was like which enrichment vendor, which was a little bit as a question mark at the end of that, like what are you guys using? One of the things that I think is one of the most interesting trends in operations today is actually a data acquisition strategy. It has gone from I am a Zoom info shop, or I am like we're predominantly a European business, so this is who we use, to forcing companies to actually now have a multi-vendor strategy, and where they are actually looking at, I use Zoom info for this slice of my market, right? And then I supplement that slice with an Oceanos, or for my SMB leads, I have to use, another vendor, and then actually applying that same model outside of the North American market to a global perspective as well. Like, for example, we're seeing, most of our customers right now using about 5 to 6 very different data providers, and we help them stitch together that approach from a multi-vendor waterfall perspective to create that perfect record based off your business needs and outcomes, not necessarily just taking what Zoom Info says as gospel and go, hey, it's Zoom Info, it's got to be the best, right? Actually understanding that there is a giant gap today in the enrichment space, and we as operational professionals have to actually find a way to fill those gaps and build a strategy on how to fill those gaps, not just have a data spend conversation.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I want to, before we go on too far into the hour here, I wanted to just ask about, like, for those that have a process in place, right? We've talked about the ideal situation. Like, what do you suggest is the one thing that they look at today to improve? Like, what's the, like, this is something you absolutely have to do right now.
Oh my gosh. I would probably flip that and say, we talked about aligning teams a lot, aligning around revenue, around metrics. I actually think the easiest thing you can do to align teams is to align around the customer. I do not walk into a room and say, how's the customer friction here? Is the customer complaining? What's going on? What do they want? What do they hate about this? That never creates any sort of intensity between teams. Like, if you can go back and actually, Ivan, you were mentioning Gong and like giving clips. It's really hard for marketers to react to salespeople. We need this kind of asset. Can you get it to us? Versus check out this 45-second clip from the customer asking for XYZ. What do we have? What do you think? So like, us rallying around the customer is the biggest thing. So if you have an existing process, the biggest thing I would urge you to do is go put yourself, even, it doesn't have to be hard. Go map it out. Go think about your process and layer on what the customer's feeling at each point. Try to figure out the place where it's the biggest friction for your customer. And that's probably the biggest opportunity for you to make more money.
Such a good one. That's hard to follow because that's the best possible answer. I would say, and again, I'm thinking through the lens of smaller businesses. There are a lot of small and mid-sized startups that have a process, and the VP of sales and the CEO will tell you we absolutely have a process, and whether or not it's the same as the one that people are actually following on the ground is a different question altogether. But I guess my guidance would be the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest win for most companies who haven't done this yet. Of course, if you have, don't listen to me. Write it all down. Literally write and draw your process. We use Miro at Iceberg, so for every single customer, we have a giant whiteboard that is, Miro is essentially just like an infinite whiteboard, and we draw everything and we label everything. You can't really do good gap analyses if you don't have these things drawn up. You can't guarantee that everyone really understands what they're supposed to be doing through a process if you don't have it drawn up or written up in a thoughtful way. Mm-hmm. This has been a big push for our business over the past couple of years, and it's the eating your vegetables of ops. It's not sexy. It's not fun. Nobody wants to do it, so most people don't do it. And then you do it, and you realize all the things that having done it earlier would have done for you. And I think this can also feed really well into Jen's advice here, because you can also map customer experience against your process and talk about places where customers are not having a great experience as part of your gap analysis. Mm-hmm. So that's my low hanging fruit answer.
And let me kind of maybe wrap that up, because I think what Jen and Taft just said is good work will still be good work, right? It will be good work today. It will be good work tomorrow. And I love how Jen kind of put that sort of top bar. I love how Taft kind of followed it with okay, now we understand the customer problem and how we can actually get to more revenue. Okay, what are those adjacent or underlying processes that will get us there? And my advice will be at the third one, look at the data. What are the data that is going to be driving these processes so that we can create that better experience? Because again, the whole idea here is to build that pyramid, and you start at the top of it and you go down. But the only way to make the pyramid better is to actually how the pyramid feed at itself at the top, right? It's kind of like a waterfall. If you guys had those in your own garden, it's just a feedback loop. And the reason why it's so nice is because you just keeps recycling that same water, right? And so that's what I would add to this conversation. Once you've gotten to how do I create more revenue? What are those processes that I need in order to get there? Okay, where's my data, and how do I get that data to become really the fuel for my business to drive those processes to then create those experiences, drive that revenue that I'm looking for?
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like there's some specific strategies you guys kind of look for, going in, looking at the data, mapping out the customer journey, looking at voice of the customer directly, tools that natural language processing and AI. They have been able to kind of transcribe conversations to a point where you can do a keyword search and find that information. For companies that maybe don't have that technology in place, what's the best way to kind of capture that, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's still people doing attribution on Excel, right? If you're a 10-person company, I think you could still do that. And again, I think it was Taft that said it. It's important here to also don't over-engineer things, right? Low-hanging fruit. Most amount of impact with least amount of efforts, right? What is that, right? And again, if you've already gone through the process, what's our common goal? Okay, well, it is to grow revenue. No company is going to come in and say it's anything different, right? But what is sort of what's my path to doing that? And I think that just by having that goal, I feel a lot of the people that we talk to when we ask them like, hey, what's the C-suite or like what's the executive layer talking about is the biggest business challenge today? It's actually really hard for even the director level layer to articulate that, right? And how that has actually bubbled down, or sorry, trickled down, I should say. And so I feel like, set that North Star, have that be understood, and how each one of the layers of your organizations is actually contributing to that very, very top level goal. Right? With my SDR organization, for example, I only talk about conversions. Right? That's the key metric for the SDR organization. Right? And then the quality conversations, booked meetings, the amounts of phone calls, LinkedIn outreaches, videos, or emails are all sort of like precursors to getting to that conversion. But if we don't hit our conversion metrics, sales don't have enough pipeline to actually work. We're not closing enough revenue. So like having that North Star goal actually makes sense to the layer in which you're talking to, right? And so an SDR organization, very easy. They're financially motivated and driven to actually increase conversions. By increasing our conversions, you're going to contribute to that North Star. You're going to get a chance to be promoted to a rep. You're going to be able to accelerate your career. You're going to have a really early startup success story where somebody got acquired or went IPO on your resume, right? And so I think it just like looking at it from that perspective, I think it's where somebody should start, and I think again the same thing goes for I think large organization. I think it's what Steve Jobs did when he came back to Apple in '97, right? I think that's exactly what he did, and even an organization like Apple needed to have this conversation internally. Like, what is that we're trying to do?
That's amazing. Yeah, that's great. Do you guys have anything? Did you want to add on to anything?
Only thing I would say about this idea, and I'm latching on to one thing you said, which is go look at low hanging fruit and go look at kind of low effort, high impact. The only thing I would say is like those are few and far between, unfortunately. The amount of times that I've done the matrix and like dotted all the things in different areas, the ones that are low and low effort, high impact, there's one or two pretty intuitively people find those. Like pretty quickly people find those and are able to do them. The problem is that most of your work's going to fall into high, like the ones you want to do are going to be high impact, high effort. And then you have to ruthlessly prioritize. Then you have to answer the questions. That's a pretty senior skill set. What Ivan's asking for, which is what does the business care about? What's the big idea? How do you align with executives? I find that that's really hard for a lot of people to answer. And kind of that was your point, but it's a pretty senior skill set to look at what the business cares about and align to that, and then ruthlessly say no to stuff that doesn't fall there because we don't have time, right? Like we don't have time to do 10 initiatives this quarter. So how are you picking those 3? You better have some sort of prioritization matrix that lets you decide on the right work, because ultimately that's the only thing you can do every day is like pick the most important work today. Ooh, I'm going to make a t-shirt.
That's great. Okay, so since this is Sales Hacker, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you guys for tips and tricks or hacks that help you get deals across the line faster. Do you got any hacks or tips or tricks you can share?
I got I'm going to go super tactical on you here. And so this breaks all the rules I've been laying out about not getting tactical first, but it's a hack. This is something we do. This works really, really well in smaller startups that don't have really complex systems yet. If you use Salesforce, especially, this is like an easy one to build. If you have a good Salesforce admin, you can build it in a few hours and it will pay dividends for years. I like to have fields on the opportunity that are driven by a flow and date stamp when each sales stage is entered. It's like such a small thing, but you can do so much with that data. And a date stamp, here's another like little tidbit that most people don't think about or realize. A date stamp is like a checkbox, but with more information. It's still binary. It's either filled or it's not, but it gives you more information than a checkbox does, which is when it was stamped. And so just when it enters each stage, have the corresponding field stamped with today's date. You have to think through some logic, like what happens if stages move backwards? What if you skip stages? And you can make decisions based on how your sales work to think through those things. It's not rocket surgery. And once you have that, you can do some really cool stuff. And so if you want to find the leaks in your funnel and find where deals get stalled, that's the place to do it. Because otherwise, with Salesforce, which is ultimately a moment in time system, you're always sort of leaning on your memory of what your pipeline looked like last week or last month to decide what's stuck, what stalled, what should have been closed, who's not managing their pipeline well. But this simple hack allows you to put a lot of data in play in reporting. Just anybody who knows basic Salesforce reporting can now go build reports to answer questions like, when we win a deal, how often on average does it live in stage 3? When we lose a deal, how often on average does it live in stage 3? Is there a threshold here above which we should be paying attention to a deal and asking really hard questions about whether it's stuck? And you have so much good data in the opportunity, and Salesforce is like a poor man's Tableau, right? You can slice a lot of data as long as it's all in the same object. And so you can say, well, if it's more than $100,000 and it's in stage 3, how many days before I should be worried? And I should have it surface in this report or this dashboard or this whatever. And so that one little hack is like beautiful. And you don't really need a business problem you're solving to do it. Like, you should just go build it and have it.
Yeah, I love that, Taft. And like, if I just spoke to the salespeople on the call, like BDRs and sales rep, it would be like lose fast and lose hard, right? There's no, like, most companies I've ever been at, like the number one reason as to why we lose the deal is because like lost traction, prospect went cold, right? Or went dark, right? It's like, and that's probably because we were selling to the wrong person and we actually weren't actually aligning ourselves with that business impact. And so, like when I coach, BDRs or newly sort of graduated reps, right? It's like, it's okay to go like, I don't think we're for you. And let me tell you why, right? There's nothing better, like, because as a salesperson, you're constantly dealing with that notion that you are a sleazy car salesperson and you're going to try to steal their money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no better way to break through that with honesty and just transparency and trying to build trust. And so, like, I love what Taft was talking about, where it's more of an operational, but if I could just take a moment to talk to all the young salespeople out there, like, lose hard, lose fast, and focus on the ones where you feel like what I am bringing to the market can have an impact on this business. Because if you line yourself around that, you're going to have an impact on the person that you're selling to. And guess what? The world is way too small these days to not have a good deed come back around. Like, when I first started Openprise, I created a campaign that I called Friendly Faces, and I made about 30 to 40% of my number every single year of just going to people that have used us in the past. We have a really high NPS score here at Openprise, and so I knew that these were advocates of our platform and our technology and the impact that we can have. And so anytime anybody switched, the first thing I did was, hey, congratulations on the promotion. We'll love to connect, talk about how we can reinvent the great things that we did at your previous company. Let's have an impact for you. Let's impact somebody's professional trajectory and what they want to achieve in life. And I think that that's one of the things that I really try to tell people, like, early on, that, like, if that is a hack, then maybe it is a hack. But I got that advice very early on in my career, and it's something I really stuck into.
That's great advice.
I'm so torn on going technical or more consultative. +1, both of you. I think be consultants, don't be salespeople. And a consultant's going to figure out what that person needs. Be really curious. And so, like, I love that. Definitely listen to Taft about going backwards and forwards on stages if you're going to date stamp, because that's where that breaks. So I think that's super smart, Taft. I think I'm going to go a little bit more as a human in the work environment. What can you do to get ahead? And whatever your role is, it's a really, really simple thing, which is think about communication as outbound and inbound. So how are you communicating out to whatever stakeholder, whether you're selling something, whether you're talking to any stakeholder internally, whether you're talking to your boss, there's the information that you give them and the information they give you. Anytime anyone asks you for an update, it should be like an immediate trigger to you to say, I have not been communicating enough. If someone says to you, where's that project? What's the status on X? What's going on? That is a pretty like big moment for you to go, oh, okay, this person wants to be communicated more often. Like you can up the amount that you send. So maybe you have a boss that wants weekly updates. Maybe you have a boss that doesn't care, and when you go one-on-one with them next week, that's fine. But go figure that out. Anytime anyone asks you for an update, that should be a moment where you go, okay, I gotta up the amount of updates I give.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. And to your points, we're having a pretty lively discussion on Sales Hacker about what have you learned as a sales professional? One of my responses to that was, before understanding this professional a lot more, I thought you had to be a pest, right? And my husband, who's a lifelong seller, taught me that, there's a fine line between persistence and being a pest, and over communicating, being able to be transparent and tell the person hey, we're not for you. Those are, I think, part of that, being a consultative, helping that person, that prospect, that customer find the solution, because you're providing them something that's going to solve a pain point in their life. And I feel like all that's part of that. So I appreciate those hacks. That's really, really helpful. If you're not part of the Sales Hacker community, I encourage you to join, where you can continue this conversation and start your own conversation, initiate your own questions, and get feedback, whatever you need. We're here to help and support you. I want to thank you all for joining us in this discussion.